Shalom and welcome to the European Report. Here we are in the European Parliament, in the heart of the European Union. And in today's programme, we will be looking at the recent European parliamentary elections and asking what are the challenges and the opportunities facing Israel in this new parliament. And in this programme, I'm joined by Bas Belder, MEP for the Netherlands, only for a couple more weeks, I'm afraid. And also Tomas, Sandell, the founder and director of the European Coalition for Israel, and Charlie Weimers, who has been newly elected as a Swedish MEP. So congratulations.
Yeah,
I'll start off with you, Tomas. It feels like it's been ages since I've done a programme with you here in the European Parliament. So can you share with us some of the diplomatic activities that you've been involved in with Israel in recent weeks, and how successful has your Pray and Vote campaign been during the European parliamentary elections?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. It's very special to be back, in particular on a transitional period like these next weeks when we have one parliament leaving and another one coming in. As you mentioned, we were quite active, and that's part of the reason why I couldn't make the last program in the elections, to really encourage Christians to vote in the elections, to pray for the elections, but beyond that, to get involved in the process, to engage and speak with candidates and make friendships for the next 5 years. And I believe this has been a good exercise for many of our friends to see that they can also make a difference. Beyond that, of course, we've been involved hosting events at the United Nations in New York, but also out on the streets. And I would emphasize how important it is that we as Friends of Israel are seen out of the streets, be it Helsinki or Geneva, where we've been active in the last few weeks, speaking and raising awareness of the rise of anti-Semitism. It's so important for the Jewish communities, for the State of Israel, but also for us to see that we can make a difference. Last thing I would like to mention is the city of Malmö in Sweden, which is often being associated with a very nasty form of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. I was there just a few weeks ago. We had a campaign against anti-Semitism, where I, in my speech and later in a press statement and an opinion editorial, asked or requested that the city of Malmö would organize an event to combat anti-Semitism and celebrate Jewish life. And to my surprise, I must say that just days before the European election, the Swedish government, which is a social democratic government, came out with this idea to say in October there will be a large conference against anti-Semitism in Malmö, of all places. And at times like that, you feel quite happy that, you know, sometimes you don't have to wait years and years for results, but sometimes it's just a matter of days.
Absolutely.
So that was very great.
Great news. Thank you for giving us the update, Tomas. And Bas, what can I say apart from thank you for everything you've done. We are going to miss you on this programme, and I'm sure all the Israel supporters in the European Parliament and all the various organisations that work with you are going to miss you greatly. So thank you for your 20-year legacy of standing and showing the courage to stand with Israel and the Jewish people, and you're a history maker in this place. So can you sum up your, very difficult I know, but your last 20 years in service to this institution and what you've achieved?
I can only comment on your saying that I'm indeed leaving the Parliament after 20 years, but that doesn't mean that I'm not anymore involved. On the contrary, I will be involved. I will be always available for help for my colleagues who have a heart to the Jewish people, inside and outside the Jewish state of Israel. But behind the scenes, and my wife is very happy that I will be more at home, but at the same time she's also a great lover of Israel, so she gives me enough space to do what is not my job and what is not an obligation. On the contrary, that is a sake of my heart to struggle and to fight for the security and the well-being of the Jewish people world around, especially in the state of Israel, and also that there will be more safety and more relaxed time coming for the Jewish communities. That is an issue that is very near to my heart.
Absolutely. So thank you for your dedication and service. And Charlie, congratulations to you on being newly elected as an MEP here in this institution. And it's almost like, for example, Bas is passing on the kind of baton to you to take up that cause of standing with Israel and the Jewish people. So you've got a lot to live up to. But indeed, my question really is, what were the main issues in Sweden that dominated the European parliamentary elections?
Well, the first one I'd like to mention would be the all-European primary issue, which is climate. We had a stark contrast between, on the one side, those who were talking about rational solutions, investing in fossil-free energy, where we get the most bang for the bucks, really, which is outside the European Union. Instead of starving our countryside population or shutting down factories in Europe, that's what we should do, said my side. And then we had the other side who wanted to basically lower the emission targets so low in Europe that we really have to make some real concessions in terms of GDP growth and other things. That was nuclear was another issue which was included in that area. The other one being migration, and where all parties but mine were in favor of moving the migration competence to the Brussels level and imposing mandatory quotas, basically. Big issue. Also during the election campaign, what came up on May the 1st when the socialists had their traditional 1st of May demonstrations was talking about Malmö, was the youth of the Social Democratic Party that shouted, "Crush Zionism." This in a situation where they as a party went out in the election campaign to combat the extremism. At least they claimed to do it. But within their own ranks, they let it grow year by year, and it ended up in this. And they still haven't done anything concrete out of it. Until they do, I'm sorry, Tomas, but I will call their Malmö conference window dressing.
Yeah,
really.
I'm also afraid of, and Tomas quite rightly stressed that the Friends of Israel should be present on the streets. In my country, the last weeks, what we are seeing openly on the street, the hatred toward Jews, the hatred to the state of the Jews, Israel, celebrating Al-Quds Day in The Hague. Yeah. That is the capital of our government. That is our government, that is our parliament. I feel very, very much concerned and ashamed.
Yeah. And Tomas, this is going to be your fourth term. In terms of your engagement with the European Parliament, we have approaching a new Parliament, which will be here for another 5 years until the next elections. What are the issues that you will be focusing on working on, and what is the mission for ECI during the next 5 years, the life of this Parliament?
Well, as the saying goes, MEPs come and go, ECI remains. After 16 years. For me personally, it's quite interesting. We moved to Brussels already in 1994. So I've been following more or less the events of this parliament for 25 years. And we always do it looking for more at the methodology. Pray, educate, advocate. As a Christian organization, of course, we emphasize prayer, and we're not ashamed of that. But one would be surprised how much education, basic education, is needed in this parliament when it comes to the most basic facts about the conflict in the Middle East. So just to debunk the many myths which are there of so-called Palestinian land, which was confiscated by these Jews who came from nowhere to colonize Palestine, which of course is historically not true at all. So there's a lot of education to be done, both in seminars but also on one-on-one.
And more Israel presence here in the parliament.
Absolutely. Coming back to Malmö again, I absolutely agree with what Charlie is saying, that it's one thing to make an announcement, it's another thing to say, well, what will be the real outcome? We as an organization are committed to make them accountable, and we have already engaged with them and said, listen, you're planning this event, we'd like to be involved. And I think that's also where we can see, for example, when it comes to their stance on the State of Israel and anti-Zionism, if they are willing to address that issue, because if they're not, it's something which is in complete contradiction with the guidelines of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. So we have a lot of work still to be done.
Absolutely. Yeah, Bas, as an experienced MEP in this office, in this institution, 20 years of experience, we're really counting on your kind of expert knowledge. Now, we saw with this European parliamentary election that the more centre-right parties and the centre-left parties did very badly. And what we've seen is the rise of national parties. We've seen the rise of the liberal parties as well as the Greens. What will this mean for the workings of this institution and Parliament, and how will that affect Israel?
I was not surprised, because I have very good. I want to refer to the just published yesterday. My dear friend here was ambassador of Israel in the Parliament, in the European institutions, Oded Eran and Shimon Stein, both fellows and scholars of the Institute of National Security Studies, wrote an article, an analysis of Israel and the new European Parliament and no spring in the offing. And I want to underline what they are writing, for that is also my feeling. They write, it can be assumed that the strengthening of the Liberal and the Green parties in the European Parliament, is also my experience, alongside the lack of progress between Israel and the Palestinians on the political track, will aggravate tensions in relations between Israel and the EU. So we should be very alert, and therefore I'm really delighted that new elected persons like Mr. Charlie Weimers will be here, because they will. I expect there was in the last 20 years always a hard battle to defend in a proper way Israel became against a biased view of the Middle East conflict, and with this strengthening of the liberals, especially the Greens, I expect that the battle will be more harder. So behind the scenes, you get 100% my support to push it back and to have a balance. And what is also on my mind, the last 8 years there was not an association council, the highest level of dialogue between the EU and Israel, and that is such. They had all the association councils with Jordan, with Egypt, but not with Israel. And why? And this one-side approach of the EU should be reversed, and I hope that the Parliament will get in this direction. But because of what I just said, there is already a struggle, that there is not a worsening of the situation in relations, but that's my last sentence. The last chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, my main committee for 20 years, Mr. McAllister, he had the courage to invite Avi Dichter, his colleague in the Knesset, who was chair of the Knesset Foreign and Defense Committee. And that was already a challenge, how he was here maltreated by the left, even by sharing his views and experience. Such intolerable attitudes, especially from Spanish MEP, and I hope that the next chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I hope fully, and that it will be again Mr. McAllister, should have the same courage to invite Israeli ministers and to invite Knesset members to have their view on the situation, to be informed from the first source were well known.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Charlie, it very much seems...
So that is a kind of BDS parliamentary.
Yeah. Charlie, it very much seems that the results of these, the recent European parliamentary elections are very much reflected in the emergence of pro-EU parties and those that are more nationalistic or Eurosceptic. What impact do you think that will have on the formation and the decisions made in this parliament regarding Israel?
Firstly, I would like to say that it's not a brand new divide. It's an old divide between supranationalism and intergovernmentalism. And it's been highlighted by the fact that the Brits have voted to exit the EU. I think that the EU is really at a fork. It needs to choose its future path. And on the one side, we have the supranationalists or the federalists who will try to move power further away from the people on several issues, learning almost nothing from the reasons behind Brexit. Because if you look at it, utopianism is really one of the reasons for Brexit. If, for instance, if the EU had implemented limited quotas for stationed workers in the UK, as long as the difference in GDP is this big, and then gradually gone to full liberty of movement, then I don't think we would have seen Brexit. And now these same forces are viewing the UK departure as a carte blanche for trying to impose EU taxes, EU army, so on and so forth. That is what is going to lead to EU disintegration in the end. On the other hand, we have the ECR group, parties like mine, conservative parties who try to point to a different path, and it's basically, I think, a path that in the end would save the European cooperation. We will definitely see a stark divide here, and it's going to be interesting to see what these new parties who have promised to be constructive, whether they'll be or not. Yeah. It'll show.
And Tomas, what is your viewpoint? Because, clearly the challenge now for ECR and also for our programme is to identify new MEPs to work with, those who, like Charlie, are willing to stand up for Israel and put their colours to the mast. But in terms of assessing the outcome of this election, how it's going to result in votes and have influence, now we know with the Liberals and also the Greens, they take an anti-Israel position on many issues. So how do ECI engage with the new MEPs that are coming into this parliament?
Well, Simon, I think it's very important for us to make it clear that we work with people from all party groups. And although clearly there are those party groups like ESR, which are much more pro-Israel and sensitive to issues related to the Jewish people than other groups, there are good people across the line almost. There are German Greens who have a very strong sensitivity when it comes to anti-Semitism. There are Social Democrats in the Central and Eastern European countries, which are some of the strongest supporters of the State of Israel. It goes without saying that many of the parties which would be considered nationalistic or Eurosceptics, you find some of the strongest supporters of the State of Israel. You look at Hungary, there are many other examples. So the picture is rather complex, but I think for us as a non-partisan organization, it also gives us a credibility to have representatives from all these party groups on the program and be able to unite on this particular issue of standing up for Israel and the Jewish people. What I would like to point out is that in this next 5-year term, I have one desire, and that is that the narrative surrounding the Holocaust would expand. And when I say that, I think the current narrative here in the European institutions is that, you know, you had the Nazis, you had concentration camps, the 27th of January, it all stopped and they were liberated. But then the story stops there. And I think it's like watching a movie, watching Private Ryan and stopping at the, after 1 hour, and nothing makes sense. So I think the narrative of what happened here more than 75 years ago is really to say that this is a redemptive story. The worst of tragedies took place on European soil, but what came out of the ashes of the Holocaust, the state of Israel. If we disconnect the two, then we'll never be able to fight anti-Semitism. So what I hope is really to hear strong statements to say that the state of Israel is the solution to anti-Semitism, not the other way around. The European Union, as important it is that we stand up in the fight against anti-Semitism, the European Union is not the solution. The state of Israel is the solution, and we should say this openly and frankly.
Absolutely. So we're down to the last 4.5 minutes of the programme, and Bas, we're definitely going to miss you. And I want to thank you for your hard work and your dedication. But I think it's very important, as you're passing the baton on to Charlie here, what advice have you got for Charlie in order to be courageous and stand up for Israel and the Jewish people in this institution, the European Parliament?
Of course, it is up to the new elect, Mr. Weimers, to choose his committee. But I must say, as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I don't know your choice, of course, can be of much help for the State of Israel, because it is also the Foreign Affairs Committee has the competence is also the neighborhood policy, and there we have Israel, and that is quite important. And also next to the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Israel delegation. When I have a wish, the first wish I utter here is that, for example, Mr. Weimers will be in the bureau of the Israel delegation, for we need young, dedicated people who are active and are placing Israel here on the agenda in Israel, with Israeli speakers, with Israeli information, to have a real dialogue. How can we are very fond of dialogue, but not with Israel. How is it possible? How is it possible? So. I wish you to at least a vice chair, as I'm now still being, but for me it always be the chair, and then I'm full available to advise you, not to hinder you, but to support you. For you should know, I should know my place, of course, but that is so important that our dedicated people should be in the Foreign Affairs Committee, should be also in the Israel delegation, and also look at the Committee for International Trade. All these attempts to try to harm Israeli interests, to harm commercial interests, to harm the trade relation between the EU and Israel, we should never, we should alert on every side. I was, for example, also a member of the Iran delegation, not because I love the Islamic Republic of Iran, but know your enemies, and I learned a lot of Israeli diplomats. I admire them. Why they are so cool-blooded? Because they know they face a lot of enemies, as they remain cool and are ready to defend and secure its own survival. And I will hardly support what Tomas was saying. I was just reading it. There was an Israeli who was traveling around Europe quite recently, the last week, and what he said, why Israel is the safe haven for the Jewish people. There they are not dependent on the goodwill of outsiders to defend and secure their lives.
Thank you so much, Bas. There you go, Charlie, some advice. So you have to be a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee and be part of the Israel delegation. That's Bas Belder's
delegation. Head of the Palestinian Authority delegation, maybe. Know your enemy.
Charlie,
to neutralize them.
Charlie, in terms of, you're a newly elected MEP to this institution. What role do you think our viewers across Europe can play in supporting you and giving the help that you need in order to stand up for Israel and the Jewish people?
Actually, I think they can play a big role. Firstly, by helping us identify anti-Israeli activities in the European Parliament. We're keeping our eyes open 24/7 here, but we don't see everything, and we've seen instances of socialist MEPs posing with portraits of terrorists in this very house.
Yep.
We've seen BDS people being invited to the European Parliament. We are going to call them out, and if we get help by the viewers, the listeners, to identify this and to raise their voice, to call these MEPs and let them know what they think about it. Just don't email, because emails can easily be deleted. Call them. Let their offices work hard to defend their anti-Israeli activities.
Great. So, Bas, Tomas, and Charlie, thank you so much for being my guests on today's European Report. And I want to thank you for watching this programme. The new European Parliament is due to start very soon. So this gives us an opportunity to stand with pro-Israel MEPs like Charlie, and also our dedication and thanks go to Bas Belder for his 20 years of dedication and service for Israel in the European Parliament. So I want to thank you for watching today's European Report.